Cieslik. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer of Localcoin. We got our bid ATMs around this conference here. You may remember me from such speeches as last year's, are we still talking about crypto regulation? Well, here I am, again, talking about crypto regulation. So let me make sure I don't screw this up. There we go. What has happened since my last speech? Well, we're just over halfway through the year, and apparently the crypto space has just seen the worst month ever in July 2023 in terms of fraud and theft. And according to CoinDesk, this was mostly because of smart contract failures and flash loans in DeFi. And it's especially true for smaller and lesser known, exchanges that you might not be so familiar with. But I've literally been updating this presentation daily as things are changing that much in this space. It's hard to keep up, but that's kind of my job, because although I wanted to come here and harangue everyone for all the bad things that happened since my last year's speech, which I'll still do a little bit of, because what happened hasn't really been great. There's the global context, which of course is mostly led by what happens in the US. First, there was FTX pretty soon after my last year's presentation. I don't need to belabor that. I think we all know what has happened there. In addition to the fact that he's been out and back in jail in the last week. The CEO of Celsius being criminally charged. Huobi executives arrested a few weeks ago. But most importantly, and what I'll talk about a little bit more, are the lawsuits with Coinbase and Binance, both of whom I'm glad to see are represented here. And it has really been hard to keep up because this keeps changing literally daily. And the focus for me has really been on, and I know just from conversations that we've been having with people here, is that the decision on what is or isn't a security. And the SEC wanted all but Bitcoin to be labeled as security. But we're still in this wait and see, what's gonna happen kind of mode. There's been several, exploits and rug pulls that I don't need to really waste too much time on. But I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the bank runs of the big banks in the US, SVB, Signature. I can never remember the third one. And I think there's been plenty of discussion on MiCA, the UK regulation. I won't go into that either. Suffice to say that there's a lot that's been happening in the last year with regulation, which is why my job is never boring. I'll talk a little bit about the Canadian context. There we go. I know nobody's looking at my slides, but I put them up there for a focus point. Now, the securities regulators here have tightened up a little bit. They're now requiring the pre-registration undertaking from custodial exchanges and those offering stable coins. Many of our compadres are here. Yeah, I see some people, yay! Not me so much, but this has caused a few exchanges to leave Canada. Binance is not operating in Canada anymore, and OKX has left. There's been a few others that have been banned. KuCoin and Polynex have been banned. But on the positive side, there's 12 other entities that are operating under a PRU in Canada. And although Binance has exited Canada, they've been approved elsewhere, most recently Dubai, El Salvador, and Japan. So what is really indicative of what's happening here is regulatory arbitrage. Some people are seeing Canada as too hard of a barrier to enter for such a small market to serve. But crypto didn't invent regulatory arbitrage, so nothing new here. People going where the rules are less stringent to be more successful is as old as the concept of time. But this is a very Canadian response. Securities regulators regulating something but not telling us what is a security or not. And that's kind of par for the course in my experience. But what I want to point out as well, and in my own self-interested way, is that there's still another way to operate here in Canada. I know lots of people want to talk about the security side, and I've worked for plenty of securities regulated exchanges now in Canada, but we still have this whole other category called a money service business, which is what we are, Localcoin, the company that I work for. And under FINTRAC's MSB regime for non-custodial, non-securities, non-derivatives, non-stable coins. And so that regime does still exist. And I'm just, moving forward, I'm pointing out the US is taking the hardest line. And I've already mentioned the SEC lawsuits. In addition, there's just been a bipartisan group of senators, once again led by Senator Warren, who hates crypto, entitled the Crypto Asset National Security Enhancement and Enforcement Act. They always name their acts something funny. Can-See Act, because Warren is still likening the use of crypto to that being used by, the bad actors, the fraudsters, drug lords, ransomware. I really hope that over these years that I've been doing these speeches here, that we further and further weed those people out of this space, because we don't need this kind of heavy hand. And that's kind of where I'm getting to with this talk. It's just a little hard to read my notes on my phone, so I'm sorry for not looking out more. The new bill is going to even try to pull in more than what the SEC is pulling in with their Coinbase, Binance lawsuits, but the bill is aiming really at wallet providers and miners and wants to move the regulation under the Commodities Futures Trading Commission instead of the SEC. So you can certainly see the connection between all the bad things that have happened and the shitty regulatory response coming out of it. Because when you play stupid games, you're going to win stupid prizes. And even the IRS is popping up again, requiring tax on staking. And the Federal Reserve is coming out in the US and putting more rules on banking when they offer novel services such as crypto or crypto asset related activities, as well as if they're going to be backing stable coins for other entities. So where is the good news here? Some days I ask myself that repeatedly. Where is the good news here? I'm going to say that, I do choose to see all this regulatory involvement as progress, even though it's largely, being led by the US. It usually is, particularly for Canadians, because up until now, the US has been regulating by enforcement, and this is not cool. Whereas several entities have been asking repeatedly for guidance, have been putting applications in and getting declined. The SEC, in the meantime, appears to be contradicting their mandate to keep the market safe, while forcing large platforms to shut down, to leave the US. I personally feel this really leaves the people at a disadvantage. They're going to have to put their money in offshore entities, those that are less closely monitored, less closely regulated. And the thing is, people obviously still want to buy crypto. And when these lawsuits come up and smaller entities can't quite fight back, bigger entities can. Coinbase and Binance have very deep pockets. And the earlier court decisions that have come out, again, it's flip-flopped over and over. I bet something's changed today while I've been here. And despite being under threat of lawsuit in the US, Binance has grown to 150 million people user base. And I already mentioned that they've gotten more licenses. And the other good thing I wanted to call out too, related to my earlier thought, is just, while there was a big increase in fraud in July, year over year, fraud has gone down. So I think things are changing. While the bad things that have happened, the regulators have come in, there's been lawsuits. It sounds terrible, but it's a big yo-yo going back and forth that I think is going to come out for the good. And I know for the last few years, the rhetoric has been, oh, well, institutional is the holy grail. It's not a new sentiment, and I know I've said it myself before even, probably on this stage, or another of the 1,000 crypto events I've done over the last 5 years. Like in the last year, we've seen MasterCard expand its cryptocurrency payment offerings with the payment card. They've had partnerships with people like Binance, Nexo, and Gemini. And just last week, obviously, we saw the PayPal news. Everyone's pretty excited about that, except for one small piece of it with the freezing mechanism. And the BlackRock ETFs caused some pretty big waves when the applications went out, with Bitcoin hitting more than a one-year high when that happened. And there's 13 other ETF applications in the US right now. Let's not forget Canada was the first one to approve an ETF. But I'm going to say, well, all that is good for the market. I do support very much the securities regulators coming in and doing what they're doing, and then the big exchanges forcing their hand and fighting back as well. I sit back with popcorn like Michael Jackson gif there. But there is another way. I do think there's another way. Centralized exchanges are under heavy scrutiny with the lawsuits, as well as decentralized exchanges, wallet providers. Everyone's being looked at. But there are many threats, and there are still different approaches available. And for that, I'm grateful here in Canada. We can't hit every nail with a giant hammer like they do in the US. And if you're not the biggest player with the biggest deep pockets to wage this battle, you're kind of sitting around waiting to see what's going to happen with these people. And that's where people like Localcoin come in. Shameless plug. Actually, I'm not shamed at all to plug my own company. There is another way, and there still exists another way for non-custodial exchanges and platforms that allow people to still do self-custody. So on conclusion, I will say that it brings us to the final slide, because I think I'm out of time, but I'm sure they'll give me another minute, is that there's still issues with security when using a centralized platform, and that there's still options for self-custody. And that concludes my speech. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Charlene Cieslik from Localcoin.